So I'd like to welcome them, and we have as individual, Mr. Sean Bouillet. Il est habitué de notre.
He's well used to being at our committee.
An Air Force intelligence officer, welcome. And we also have the Lieutenant Navy, Louise Richard, registered nurse, retired. Because we have 2 full hours with you, so you can take more than 5 minutes for your opening statement. And if you need to, especially for Mrs. Richards, if you want me to stop during the 2 full hours, and just let me know, and we're going to take a break, and we will come back. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Bouillet, and for your opening statement. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
The committee members most sincerely for having us return, especially along with Louise Richard. Louise raised our national awareness and paved the way for Canada's political and media landscape to learn that veterans of modern combat are treated to a lesser standard than war veterans. That is why I call her the mother of modern veteran advocacy. Together, we pushed to negotiate with various federal departments to permit the distribution of 5,000 Kuwait medals, reminted to replace the 2,000 that Ottawa misplaced. We personally distributed more than 2,000 of those medals over the subsequent 2 years. Exactly 25 years and 2 days ago, in our first media coverage together, Louise and I called for Gulf War veterans to be designated veterans and that our SDA be declared a war. On the 10th anniversary of the Gulf War, Louise Richard, Robert Clark, and I would, in the words of the media, ambush Minister Art Eggleton and Minister Ron Duhamel outside the Commons, demanding veteran status and recognition of the Gulf War as a war. On March 29, 2001, VAC declared that we had the right to be called veterans. Minister Duhamel told us in his office that this happened because of our efforts. Louise and I witnessed the CF undergo a barrage of changes. Stowe and McClellan reports produced 93 recommendations. SCONVA held hearings throughout Canada and Germany before the 1998 report was finalized with 89 recommendations. The CF started implementation. Meanwhile, Veterans Affairs dragged its feet. In 2005, the regressive new Veterans Charter would pass in Parliament without one word of debate in the House. Regulations would be gazetted over the Christmas holidays and during an election, both prohibited by Treasury Board. Our 2005 testimony to Senate opposing the replacement of lifelong pensions and our call for due process for any legislation affecting veterans, as well as creating an Ombuds office, resulted in 2 new advisory groups. The minister, during that testimony, reluctantly promised reviews of the legislation every 3 or 4 months, while creation of a Veterans Ombuds office would be tightly controlled by VAC. The first legislative change took 6 years, and only after this committee published its report, A Timely Tune-Up. 14 years later, key recommendations that would dramatically improve the lives of the most disabled veterans and their families remain neglected, including income loss to be set at 100% of military salary, be tax-free, and be adjusted not merely with inflation, but also reflect the increases in salary, which would come with a typical CF career progression. These latter recommendations were reinforced by the 2 advisory groups as well as the Ombuds Office in 2020. What has been most disheartening and a stain upon our sacrifices is to see government outright ignore its own recommendations, which would provide key component of recognition, fair compensation. I wish to once again express my appreciation to VAC for providing additional statistics which will help fill the picture comparing disability, injuries, and multiple special duty areas. I promise to provide committee with an updated chart soonest. The table I submitted to committee for my October 10th testimony shows that up to 32% of veterans who served in the 7 SDAs cannot perform suitable gainful employment. Up to 49% suffer psychological injuries due to their service, and up to 90% have a lifelong disabling injury. These are casualties of military service, casualties of war. But they're often commemorated as an afterthought, if at all. For 70 years, we failed to grant them the transition benefits given to World War II veterans who were covered under the insurance principle, whether they served overseas or were domiciled here in Canada. How do we compensate for the tragic and painfully consequential poor transition outcomes that continue to this day? How do we recognize the resulting suffering of family dysfunction, addictions, social isolation, lost career potential, and suicide? How do we compensate the heartbreaking reality that almost half of our transitioning CF veterans still feel that they don't belong to the communities or even the country for which they sacrificed? I have provided committee a proposal to help answer these difficult questions. VAC policy has a long tradition of discriminating against the most disabled, replete with the irony that the department dedicating most of its resources to caring for the disabled is often inaccessible by the most disabled. Government lawyers recently stated that veterans have the responsibility to stay informed and that veterans are encouraged to be proactive in the benefits and services available to them. How callous that a veteran spiraling into the darkness of PTSD and suicidal thoughts, suffering a marriage breakdown, or the shame and pain of a severe physical disability is expected to stay informed. 3 days ago, I tearfully discovered that the Pension Act was amended in 1971 so that all those injured in an SDA could apply for and collect disability pensions while they still served. I reached out to Louise, but she was likewise shocked. How do we compensate for the lost years of disability pensions? Recognition through compensation is not just about what government calls the deliverables. It is about recognition of our limitations in accessing benefits. Limitations that must be truthfully accommodated. The least we can do is legislate a duty to inform veterans in a meaningful way and in accordance with their disabilities. I thank committees and the wonderful staff attached to committee and their gracious hospitality for hosting my son's school. My wife Caroline and my son Wilfred are the reasons that I'm still alive today. Yet, after 25 years of calling for independent identification for family members, my family cannot directly access Veterans Affairs benefits. What is most disturbing is that Veterans Wellbeing Act omits what the Pension Act clearly states, an obligation to my son. The military is a very caring profession. We intensely care for the mission. We fiercely care for our comrades, our unit, and the military. We profoundly care for our nation and its institutions. But we are strongly discouraged to care for ourselves. We need all government to care for what so many of us cannot fight for, recognition and compensation, which is inseparable from a nation that truly commemorates our sacrifices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Briere, and we salute your wife in the room. And now, Lieutenant Richards, the floor is yours for your opening statement. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for inviting me. Thank you, Sean, for such an incredible opening statement. I'm Louise Richard. I'm a retired medical officer, a Lieutenant Navy registered nurse. I served in the first Gulf War, 1991 Persian Gulf War. As Sean stated, I've been an advocate for way longer than I ever thought I would have to be. And the last place I thought I'd be today would be here. This has taken a toll that no one here can understand. Sorry. Today, I wasn't even, with all the advocacy I've done through the years, my illnesses and my exhaustion within this country, national defense, Veterans Affairs, every level of government we've had to deal with, have exhausted me. And when I speak of me, it's us. I'm wearing red today, not for any political affiliation or Canadian political party, excuse me. I'm wearing blood on the blood our Canadian men and women have shed on every Canadian's behalf. Not just the blood, but the limbs, the wounds, the exposures, the invisible injuries, the trauma goes beyond words that I can even express today. I wasn't able to even write an opening statement today because I've had COVID twice. The last time I was positive for over 2.5 months. And dealing with long COVID over and above everything else I'm dealing with is very, very difficult. So me being even here today is a huge effort on my part. And I have Sean to thank me for that. You're incredible. Thank you. When I went to the Persian Gulf War, I was 29 years old. I'm 63 now. I was a young officer, keen, triathlete, had just completed postgraduate studies in mental health, had just been posted here to Ottawa at the National Defense Medical Center hospital we had at the time. And I was one of the few nurses chosen to go. I was very proud of that. But that pride soon dissipated to where I'm no longer proud. I'm proud of what I've done, of what every person that wears, that is brave and courageous enough to join and wear the uniform. That has dwindled away for me. I never chose to become an advocate. I became an advocate because I became ill very quickly. And working at National Defense Medical Center, I was in direct, I was witnessing directly the aftermath of our war, seeing casualties walk in that hospital, and the abhorrent attitude that was offered to them. So I guess I'll leave it at that, or should I continue my little, I don't know how much time I have as an opening.
Talk about Gulf War syndrome.
You have the time, 5 minutes.
Okay. So, briefly, being a nurse, being one of the first to go to combat a war, leaving from Trenton on a Hercules plane, not Club Med, not going to a resort, going to war. When we arrived in Saudi Arabia, a Scud had hit the tarmac. So right away, we had to put on our NBCW suits, nuclear, biological, chemical warfare suits, and our gas mask. The stress level was maximum. We had to unload in 20 minutes. Already there, I wasn't feeling well. Why? Because before we even left Canada, we were over-inoculated with over 16 injections of various types that were never properly documented. Protocols were not followed. Over and above, when you arrive there, you get more injections I guess we'll go into this more later. But my health never restored. I got through the war, came back ill, belittled by my peers, minimized, ridiculed, labeled as a malingerer, and ended up in a hospital bed at NDMC, and very depressed, very ill. And that's where I realized that the career I was so looking forward to had ended. There was no way I was going to be able to continue as a career officer. And that's where my advocacy work started, from a hospital bed at NDMC. So we'll kind of leave it at that for now. I think I've taken more than enough of my time, but I'm ready for questions with Sean's help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Richard. I know that you've made an effort to come to testify today, but I can tell you we deeply appreciate your testimony. Thank you. So I'd like also to welcome one of our colleagues, Mr. Gerald Soroka, here with us. And we're going to start the first round of questions. And I'm pleased to invite Mr. Fraser Tolmie for 6 minutes, please. Mr. Tolmie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony. And I know every time we start off, we always say thank you for your service. And I truly want you to know that I mean that genuinely. And hearing your testimony today and the struggles that you've had, Ms. Richards, I want to let you know that you have turned the tables on those that may have mocked you, because you are fighting a different fight, and your advocacy means that you are fighting for those that have also been mocked and ridiculed and maybe left out. And so you're breaking through. And I just want to let you know that that you being here means something to a lot of other people. And so I'm grateful, and I want to say thank you. And I genuinely mean that. Continually, and I'm sorry, I will get to a couple questions here, but being in this chair is not always an easy thing, because we hear of this disconnect, a disconnect of how our military, which I've been a part of, believes in a mission. They believe in the freedom of this country, and they believe that they're serving for a purpose and a reason. And I believe in that. And everybody around this table, it doesn't matter what party you're from, believes that. The disconnect is how we treat our veterans. And it seems to be that everybody comes to the table and we all agree, but there's this disconnect between how the government or politicians feel and how veterans are being served. And there's something in the middle that seems to be lost. And it can't be a translation thing. And if you've been advocating for so many years, there has to be a real fundamental problem within the organization to hear this. And I believe it starts from the beginning. And Mr. Brier, I remember leaving the military, and it was a half-day seminar where we got some sandwiches and a cup of coffee, and if you need our help, a business card, and that was it. And no one knew what they were entitled to or what they could go through. In your experience, have you experienced that, and how, if so, how do we make this better for veterans to access services when they leave the military?
That is such a profoundly important question. I'll talk about my experience, and then hopefully I can pull that together to give some recommendations of how to change that. In addition to the fact that, a fundamental change in 1971, as officers, especially young officers, ambitious officers, we tried to keep aware of these Can 4 Gen. There were messages that came out regularly that told us what the news was that affected us. And I can tell you that I do not remember for the life of me, not only about the 1971 change that I could have applied for benefits when I returned from the Gulf War and started collecting them and be recognized for my sacrifice right away. I don't even remember them ever talking about Veterans Affairs. That's what veterans went through for 60 years, right? Because the World War II veterans, for whatever reason, right, thought that every action that came after that was not the equivalent of what they sacrificed. Even though the people domiciled in Canada were entitled to very similar benefits to those that served overseas. So for me, I can tell you that, for instance, when I got back, and I told you the story last committee, that I was immediately referred to the I was originally referred to a psychologist when I got back from war because I was diagnosed with combat stress reaction. And in theater, before I went back, I can tell you that the doctor treating me told me that I'm going to have to call your boss back in Canada. And he was stationed in Bahrain at the time. And the gist of the conversation they had was, yes, you know, your young intelligence officer is suffering from combat stress reaction, and this puts him in a position of compromising his security clearance. Okay? I was told that very plainly by the doctor. I'm already at the point of combat stress reaction. It's a nervous breakdown, acute, doesn't have to become chronic if there's right help available. But because I knew it wasn't safe to tell anyone what else I was suffering, I started closing up. And I had to keep it secret. And it manifested in all kinds of unhealthy ways, whether it be, didn't become an alcoholic, but I certainly went out on the weekends and drove home drunk very dangerously along Colonel By. I can tell you that not one relationship would last more than a month or so. I can tell you that I was very alone and my family didn't understand me, and I would be offended by their lack of understanding, and so I isolated from that. So what was acute, and had it been provided treatment and understanding, became chronic. And the availability of benefits when I was released 5 years later after the Gulf War, I still was never told about Veterans Affairs. I wasn't even told that I was entitled to CISIP. And that's why CISIP retroactively awarded me in 5 years later, not the 120-day deadline, but 5 years later, retroactively awarded the benefits. But what about the cost in the meantime?
Yeah.
Thank you for that money. What did I suffer in the meantime?
Yeah. There is another thing that you've just briefly touched on, and I want to share this as an observation about the disconnect. We as Canadians we're the second largest landmass in the world. We're isolated. We go and get involved in conflicts overseas, and the gratitude that we receive from those nations, like the French, the Belgians, the Dutch, the Kuwaitis, is completely different, and it's different because it never affects our shores. And so there is something that's lost there, and I don't know how we change that culture for Canadians to recognize that the sacrifice that we made. And then when you come back and you suffer those difficulties, people don't understand how to identify with them because they've not experienced them in their daily lives. They've not had to suffer or fight in order to protect their homes or their streets. So I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your service, and that I understand that there is a problem here. And I don't know how we can fix that, but it has to start with saying thank you for what you've done.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tolmie. And now let's go to Miss Lisa Hethner for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I really appreciate my colleague, Mr. Tomey's compassionate way of thanking you for your service. I hope it doesn't become rote when we do thank veterans at the start of every meeting. We truly do appreciate you being here, particularly Lieutenant Richard with your medical challenges. The fact that you're here is a true testament to your strength. Your words are really important, and we really, truly appreciate that you're here. Before I go further, I want to pick up on that conversation you're having, because you did, I think, substantially talk in your opening statement about the inability to know what services are available and access the benefits that are due to you. And you talked about your experience, but I'm wondering if you have ideas about the ideal. Ideally, what would it look like? How do we best provide and let veterans know what services are available to them?
If you want me to take that, or do you want to do that?
Sure, go ahead.
You can both respond. Go ahead first, Sean, and then we'll pass it over to Lieutenant Richard.
I just want to refer to the words of the First Minister of Veterans Affairs, Ian McKenzie, who said very clearly in World War II, in much anticipation that there would be need to help these people transition, is that he said, if we have money to fight war, we darn well better have money, to help them with peace. And that seems to be the central factor. There's not enough money. Veterans Affairs workers, if you meet them on an individual level, are wonderful, right? Most of the ones I've met have been very cooperative. They are so overwhelmed with Treasury Board requirements to fill out forms. ADMs are overwhelmed with the requirements of Treasury Board. I mean, really it goes down to the money. If they don't have the money to do the job, right, they keep getting blamed for failing to do the job. And really where the blame comes to is Parliament. Parliament has to authorize the money so that they can have people and go educate. I can tell you at World War II that the workers worked overtime and on weekends, went out to the fields to help the people with their new farms, hung up their coat and helped them hammer the new house that they were building under the transition benefits that should have been afforded to our active service veterans after World War II. That they went out of their way to teach the family members about what they were going to deal with. They went out of the way to teach the public about what the sacrifices were. And I provided you guys that table of statistics because it's so important. That's the education that has to get out there. What is the cost of war? Let's involve people in debate. Now, as you guys will know from the report, that in 1950, when we were all placed on active service, we've been on active service ever since, but denied the benefits of active service, right, during transition, is that from that standpoint on, and that point of history, that we should have been making it very clear and involving the public in a debate on each and every mission that we sent people on, and to make sure that the money was there, not just for the Leopard tanks and the shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles, but for the workers to be there to coach us, to help us, to inform us of our benefits while we're still there. And you guys also worked on a culture change in the military. Some of you members sat on that committee, right? How much do you think that we're an organization that stigmatizes not only masculine, anything that isn't masculine and white, right? How much do you think that organization is going to accept someone that's broken and cannot do the job? That is the ultimate discrimination. I cannot tell you how even someone with a sore ankle was immediately ostracized. So to admit that you're weak, to admit that you need Veterans Affairs benefits, it's not a safe environment in the military to learn about it. So we have to create a safe environment where they can absorb that information and be encouraged to apply for benefits.
It's really important. Do you want to add anything, Lieutenant?
I agree. I agree completely with what Sean said because you're right. And we're not taught about what happens if we're injured, what we may be entitled to. If we are released, what happens? At least back in the early 90s, I was released in 1996 after 9.5 years of service. I was not granted a military pension. You need 10 years or more. I did not know that. Until I was released, I didn't even knock at Veterans Affairs' door because I didn't think that it was the right thing to do. No one told us. I and so many others of our time just assumed you had to be out of uniform before you could go and knock at Veterans Affairs doors.
That's really important testimony. Thank you. Part of this discussion I'm finding is about compensation for veterans, and part of it is about commemoration and honoring our veterans properly. I was with, like many of my colleagues, I was in Normandy for the most recent commemoration of D-Day, Canadian flags everywhere. We went to different ceremonies in different towns, and everywhere we went, crowds of French people would come, bring their children, and commemorate the Canadian veterans who were there 80 years before. It was truly important to them. Do you think we do enough in Canada to commemorate our veterans? Should we invest more in the memory of what our soldiers have done?
No. And I mean, and it's, you know, the
I
interesting
think my
thing.
question is, should we invest more? Are you,
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make sure.
We don't do
Okay.
enough, and yes, we should invest more.
Thank you for clarifying.
I mean, look, after World War II, there were approximately 1 million veterans, right? We now have 500,000 serving members and veterans, so you would think that proportionally Veterans Affairs would be the same size, 50% of the veteran population, right? There were 30,000 Veterans Affairs employees after World War II. That was diminished quickly as the reestablishment benefits started to take effect, but it went down to 20,000, right? 20,000. We should have 10,000 Veterans Affairs employees taking care of our veterans, not 3,000 with, as Louise pointed out to me the other day, with almost half of them based in Charlottetown, far away from not only veterans but politics, right? This is a wrong place to be, okay? So in terms of education, yes, we have to educate. That table has to get out there, and those statistics about what it costs to send people to war. I mean, near 90% of SDA veterans, and some, depending on the mission, suffer a lifelong war casualty. This is insane that this information is not getting out there. And instead, we like to focus on the one day a year and call everyone a hero. I can tell you, hero is the most shaming thing I can hear. Because when I get home, right, and I'm struggling with my symptoms, then I'm not the hero. I'm not what people expect me to be. I just want to be a human being and a Canadian that reintegrates into society and appreciated, and that just like World War II, that I can still work and people will be there to help me because I've always wanted to work. But the incentives are perverse that prevent me from working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ethner. Et maintenant, nous allons...
And now we're going to move on and give the floor to Mr. Luc Desilets for the next 6 minutes. Mr. Desilets, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for your service. Your testimonies were very touching. Miss Richard, I would have a couple questions for you. For how many years have you been fighting for this cause?
Combien d'années?
For how many years? Well, since I was still wearing the uniform. Since I was in hospital. That was 1993, I believe. Yep. And since 1993, do you believe that things have moved forward at all? From what I've seen, things have changed, but not for the better. Changes aren't treatment and support. There's simply more legislation, more policies, more procedures, more waiting time, and less information. Everyone tells us to consult a website. I don't know if you've consulted the Veterans Affairs website recently. It's shameful. Can you go into detail, please? I'm a nurse. I'm a medical professional. The Gulf War led to a lot of illnesses. Not necessarily casualties on the front, but other illnesses. that are now recognized. But back then, we had symptoms that became chronic. And once they become chronic, we can discover what the illness is. It's not thanks to Canada that I found information. It's not thanks to Canada, it's thanks to the United States. We were 6,000 sent to the Gulf War, and the Americans sent 700,000. But that doesn't matter. My country is Canada. Canada has the responsibility to keep me informed. Canada needs to tell me what's going on and not tell me that it's all in my head. We don't know what's wrong with you, take these pills and get out. I had to do my own research. I had to find my own information. And I had to manage all of that. And I started to understand the Gulf War illness and the puzzle that it was. And I could not stay silent. I was surrounded by people of my age, young people, who were not officers like Sean and I, that were not educated, and they were looking to us to help them as officers. But when we are suffering and we don't have the information, we don't have any support, what do we do? Can you give me your opinion on this? We've heard in our committee that Canada was part of a war. You were there, but Canada was not at war. I must have gotten on the wrong plane. I know we're giggling, but it's not funny. Mr. Berea, I have a question for you. On March 19th, 2013, when Miss Louise Robert was here, Mr. Casey, who I appreciate greatly, was saying that the Liberal Party had created a minority report to lower proof requirements for veterans and that they would act. And at that time, Stephen Harper and the Conservative government were at the helm. 11 years later, do you believe that things have changed?
2 days ago, my wife came in, and I was downstairs in the workroom where I store my files, and I couldn't stop crying because I wanted to be true to you when I came back here to make sure I truly understood what was written in my medical reports. And the conditions were there. They're real. And then Louise says, I was crying on the phone to Louise. Louise says, hey, Sean, what about these presumptive conditions you were mentioning? I looked them up. And presumptive conditions are Australia, we know, and the United States both have these. And this is what I believe Mr. Casey was talking about when he talked in 2013. And a presumptive condition is get a diagnosis, maybe the intensity of that diagnosis so they can assess disability level. That's all you need to get a disability pension because that diagnosis is recognized as consequential to your service. And I have here a list of Gulf War presumptive conditions that have been in place for years. And we still can't get there. First, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, functional gastrointestinal disorders, medically unexplained multi-pain symptoms, okay? Those first four, I have them all, right? But I had to prove them. I had to prove them first to CPP in an 80-page testimony. Then I had to prove it to CISIP in another 80-page submission. Then I had to prove it to Veterans Affairs. Then I had to prove it again to Veterans Affairs in departmental review. Then I had to provide them evidence for that departmental review. Then I had to do another departmental review, okay? A presumptive condition would have ignored all of that. And $30,000 in 1990 is a lot of money. But it's not the big problem. It's the suffering that comes with me having to prove like a lawyer and a police investigator beyond any doubt. I mean, this benefit of the doubt that exists in Veterans Affairs, apparently, I've never experienced it. And I can tell you that me having to prove that case was grossly debilitating and set me back years. And I could have been working, I could have been putting those efforts into retraining.
Oui, vous nous avez fait parvenir beaucoup de...
You sent us a lot of documents in the past few weeks that were very relevant, and that included a list of recommendations. Could you tell us more about recommendation 5, about swapping the burden of proof? If somebody loses a limb, it's very clear, but if you could give us a bit more information.
Bonne question, and I'm compulsive with the documents. Sorry about that. I hope they're helpful. I really do, and I think they're very important because this study, I am so grateful that you guys are doing, because as you've come to realize, this has opened up a box and a door and a lid that's been closed for far too long and that we have to address. It addresses 600,000 transition veterans over the last 75, 80 years, okay? And so that reverse onus, right? Those veterans, first of all, should have all been covered 24 hours a day when in Canada under the insurance principle, right? We did it for World War II veterans domiciled in Canada when they're in active service, and we should have been doing it because what we do in the military every day is to train for a special duty service. The fact that the arbitrary date of 2001 was used, September 11, 2001 was used to say, when you're on training, then we're going to cover you 24 hours a day. We're on training all the time. Why wasn't that made retroactive back to 1950? Inexcusable in my mind. So, first of all, that would help solve the problem, is put everyone in the insurance principle. But I think the reverse onus is very important, is that it would be up to Veterans Affairs to prove that what we're claiming is not true, right? They would have to provide evidence. They would have to do the work. And I wouldn't have to produce so many documents.
Thank you, Mr. Brier. And now, for the next 6 minutes, I would like to invite Miss Rachel Blaney to take the floor. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I just want to thank you both so much for being here today and for sharing this reality that you're living. And I have to say that both of you have quite the stack of paperwork in front of you. And I appreciate that hard work, but I also feel a great deal of sadness that's been given to you as part of your service without any sort of preemptive discussion with you that when you are done your service that you would have to work so hard just to prove it. And it makes me think of a lot of veterans that my office has worked with who may not have that skill set. And when they don't have that skill set, how utterly silenced they are and how frustrated they are and how painful that is. And I think that, you know, the longer that I'm in this committee, and I've been in this committee for many years, that component of humanity is part of the system that I think is broken. Not that there isn't great people, and I think both of you have talked about that work at Veterans Affairs, but there's something in the system that is really broken that forgets humanity. So that's just my little start. You know, Sean and I have talked a lot, and I want to thank you about the duty to inform. And I know that earlier this month I put forward a motion in the House of Commons so that we can really start pushing that issue. That we ask the House to acknowledge that there should be a legislative duty of the government to meaningfully inform and assist serving members from the Canadian Armed Forces and their released members and their families in understanding the various benefits and services to which they may be entitled, no matter how extreme their disabilities or their loss. And I think that support is part of the problem, the lack of. And we've heard, I've also heard, and the committee has heard from service providers who feel that they have to go and educate the Veterans Affairs staff about what services that they provide so that they actually get the correct referrals, and that people are finding them, but until VAC refers them to that service, they can't access that service. So I'm just going to start with you, Sean. If you could just share with us a little bit about why the duty to inform is so important. And one of the things that would be very helpful for me in your answer is, what are some of the ways that that could be done? You talked about people showing up and back in the day and hanging up their coat and sticking around to help. I know that we have a different world right now. I know of veterans who won't, sometimes takes them 2 months to open mail from Veterans Affairs because they have challenges. I still think at least it's in their house, so at least somebody could hopefully open it for them. But we have to figure out, like, with all of the distrust that's been built, unfortunately, maybe not intentionally, but the impact is there. When we talk about the duty to inform, what could that look like?
It's really important. Now, I reached out, I want every member of the committee just to hear that I reached out to Rachel. I'm an office of one. I would have loved to have the energy, time, and health to reach out to every one of you about the duty to inform. But I really, I want to appeal to you all that, you know, what Rachel's saying, I would ask you all to hear, because this is a very nonpartisan issue. Right? If we look at a scale, just before I get to the answer about how to do it, if we look at a scale of obligations and imagine that the scale of military service in terms of obligation, right? We have like, hey, I really want you to do this. It'd be nice if you could do this. By the way, there's a bylaw against that. Oh, that's a civil charge. That's a criminal charge, right? And we go on that scale all the way to here. Military service is way past the criminal charge. If we don't do something right, the crimes are much more serious, or the punishments are much more serious than if we're a civilian, okay? Now let's look, that's our obligation to the military. Everything we must do, enter harm's way, lose our life, we cannot question that, right? Then we go to what's the obligation of government to veterans. It doesn't even reach to, it'd be really nice, you know, if you helped me out with my benefit application. The reciprocal obligation is non-existent. All I'm asking for is just an obligation by government, just to start that step of showing that they really recognize the sacrifices we make, the exigencies of service, the pain, the education levels, the psychological circumstances, to have an obligation to make sure that we just get to know about the benefits to which we're entitled. Because this is, I mean, I'm sure you understand, you've all been here questioning what the department says when they're trying to explain benefits. It's mind-boggling, and you guys are mostly healthy, I assume, and you're working full-time, and you're highly educated, and you see policy every day, and it's complex for you. What about the mostly grade 10 level educated veterans, right, that got out, you know, in the 1990s, right? What about those? They're not going to understand this policy. They're not going to understand a newsletter that comes from Veterans Affairs and says, you may be entitled to this benefit, contact us, right? And then we call up and we get a 1-800 number, and the referral doesn't occur to a veteran service agent. It's a generic worker at the line that reads us out a sheet that still doesn't explain anything in great detail, right? I needed help to fill out those applications, and I was still able to do what I did. There's people out there that can't even put pen to paper. They need someone to fill it out for them. So it would look like, right, first of all, building trust. Enough of the rhetoric that we really care about your sacrifice from Veterans Affairs, and that, you know, we're really well-meaning and we work so hard for you. They're overwhelmed. Let's give them staff to go out and personally brief, help, advocate. Everyone gets, as the D&D Ombudsman once said in his report, that everyone should be provided with a coach upon release. I would say that all those veterans that also are existing, those coaches should be available, because we still need coaching every day. Right? Maybe some weeks not, but there's periods that we do. And we get coaches out there that help them. They could be occupational therapists. They could be the case managers. But these got to be qualified people, know the programs, know how to deal with a person with a disability. And we meet them on their grounds, not on Veterans Affairs grounds, because those district offices are scary with their bulletproof glass. Right? They're very impersonal. So let's meet it where people feel safe. Just like in the military, they can only listen if they feel safe.
Well, thank you for that answer. And of course, my motion, just want to make sure it's on the record for anybody in this place who might want to look at it, is motion one, I hope that's right, 132. You know, I really appreciated what you said about the reality that it often feels very impersonal. And another thing, and this is a little sidetrack for me, is one of my concerns is we have multiple veterans that we work with, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well, who are extremely traumatized and have had very bad experiences with VAC, and we intercede. We're always working with them. And one of the things that I find very concerning is the lack of awareness of how to provide trauma-informed care. And of course, the most difficult people that you're dealing with at any office are the ones with the greatest amount of trauma. And in this particular sector, that would just be a larger number. So I'm wondering if both of you could talk about what you think trauma-informed care training from the Veterans Affairs would really add in terms of delivering services to veterans.
Well, thank you. It's a very, very pertinent subject. Mm-hmm. And there's a saying amongst veterans, if you don't have PTSD while you're serving, Veterans Affairs will cause it to you. Because it's very traumatizing, it's very intimidating. Soldiers are proud. We follow what we're to do. We follow mission. We don't complain. We just march on. So when we are the ones reaching out for help, that's hard for us. And one thing dealing with Veterans Affairs that I've realized personally is, number one, there's no continuity. There's no continuity. Either on the phone, a district office, an office. It's never the same person. You need to repeat your story every single time. You're hoping that the person you spoke to prior to this one now took notes and took them correctly. And I agree with Sean. We don't have enough local support. It was saddened when the Conservatives closed all those offices, and we're grateful for them reopening, but it's not enough. And I know Mr. Sean Casey is offended about Charlottetown, and I understand it's your area, but there are issues, major issues when it comes to Charlottetown. I was privileged to serve on the SNAG, the Special Needs Advisory Group that was created in 2005. Prior to the new Veterans Charter coming in 2006, April Fool's Day 2006. We were very privileged to have spent time in Charlottetown, and we went through the headquarters in Charlottetown. I was appalled at what I saw. Walking in there, the attitude of people, first of all, was they never see veterans. They never speak to veterans. They don't understand the needs. All it is paper, files, policy, legislation, more legislation, changes, amendments. And it was in certain areas of the headquarters, it's like walking into a grocery store. Aisle after aisle after aisle of files. And not structured in a manner of, well, this gentleman just lost a leg. He is critical and needs care and help yesterday. They don't have a system of prioritizing the care, the needs. So if he applied and his file arrived yesterday, well, he might wait 8 months until they get to this file, where a a more minor situation, a leg injury, a knee problem or something, well, that's straightforward, cut and dry. That'll be addressed quickly. The more complex the files, the longer the delay, it seems. And the other thing that I noticed in Charlottetown was that people didn't have that sense of urgency. It was just a file. And I got upset at a few of them, and I said, you realize these are people? These are people, and these people have families and children. And they're hurting, and they need care. They need help. They need money. They need benefits. They need care. But the way the system is organized, you don't receive care until they have decided that, oh, actually, yes, you do have this disability. We'll give you whatever. And then you're entitled to getting care. Well, that's fine, but they are very detached from the reality of the world of a veteran, of the needs. It is more policy procedure versus anything else. And the other thing that I was just shocked about was my mother came with me to Charlottetown on this one trip. And she was staying at the hotel one afternoon, and she was in the hot tub having a cocktail. Great. These three gentlemen came into the hot tub and joined her. She started chatting and said, oh, are you here on a trip or just for fun? No, we work for Veterans Affairs. So here they were sitting in the hot tub enjoying a cocktail while we were in the headquarters looking at all these pending files, pending needs, pending decisions, lives on the line here where people are depressed, suicidal, they've lost their identity, their career, their income. Many don't know what's going on. They don't have the medical knowledge. They're stuck in a paper warfare nightmare that they don't understand. Very few are there to help guide. And there again, it takes courage to even reach out, to ask for help. Where'd you go? Who'd you turn to? So what I witnessed, not only in 2005 with SNAG, but when the new Veterans Charter, what's it called now?
Veterans Wellbeing Act.
The Wellbeing Act. A decision was made, finally, shortly after that an ombudsman's office would be created. And thank you, Sean, for spearheading that. It's thanks to Sean that this gained momentum and came to fruition. And I was privileged to have been selected to be a sitting member with Pat Stogren on the Ombudsman's Committee. We were back in Charlottetown this time. Again, I didn't see any change at all. And now, since COVID, of what I've been approached about and veterans reaching out to me is that, sadly, COVID, a lot of people work from home. So what happens to all these files? What happens then? I myself have problems going on the internet with dealing with my VAC account. I struggle with that. And there's also the trust factor of it. And that was the other thing in Charlottetown. Well, where's the confidentiality? Like, we're forced to find doctors because Veterans Affairs does not have any VA hospital. We have nowhere to go. So we have to depend on civilian doctors that are, God forbid, hopefully willing to take us. Because as soon as they hear you're a Veterans Affairs client, they don't want to deal with you. The assessments, the paperwork, the denials, the appeals, the Veterans Review and Appeal Board. It is endless. And every time you go through these levels of administrative nightmares, you need more fresh documentation to justify what they've denied. Well, who's going to pay for that? So because the veteran chooses to appeal the decision, it's up to that person now to find a new doctor, fresh documentation that you have to pay for. Doctors do not write reports freely. Some specialist reports can cost up to $5,000. I've had to borrow money for my own fight with Veterans Affairs. So here we are begging for help where policy, procedure, legislation, all of this overrules the need of the veteran. The veteran is left on their own to fight this. So to me, Charlottetown, and I apologize, it can no longer be there. Veterans Affairs headquarters can no longer hide their head in sand and get away with too much, not being accountable for, just no sense of urgency. It has to stop. Almost half of the Veterans Affairs staff across our nation are in Charlottetown. We need speckled areas across our nation where we can go in physically, speak to someone, create a bond, a trust, have a sense of continuity, a sense of understanding. It doesn't do it to call the 1-866-522-2122 and speak to who? Yet again, repeat your story again, hope to be heard again. And how are they interpreting all this legislation and all these policies? They don't understand it themselves. When I was with the Special Needs Advisory Group, we were thrown into these huge workshops along with Veterans Affairs staff with binders and binders and binders of this is how the policy is, this is how it's to be applied. Well, if he misses one finger, well, this is there. If he's missing three, well, that's where that goes. Like, we need to stop looking at a veteran, the need as a sliver of a pie. We are mind, body, soul. We are one. The young man that got his leg, blown off, are we just going to look at him as a missing limb? Don't you think he's traumatized by that? What about his colleagues that witnessed this horror? What about the soldier that's firing this weapon all day long? What about the traumatic brain injuries happening here? What about, we were in the most toxic battlefield in modern history, the Gulf War. Many are dead now. They've died with weird cancers and tumors and lesions, and Veterans Affairs does not have an active research department. So what is Veterans Affairs judging me upon to deny me a condition that the United States sure the heck recognizes? Like, so many things have to change here, and the first thing is Charlottetown.
Lieutenant Richards, thank you very much. It's been an hour now. I think you would agree with me to take a pause for 5 minutes and come back, and I think it's going to help our interpreters also. So I suspend the meeting, and we come back in 5 minutes.
The meeting.
5 minutes. I would like to invite Mrs. Kathy Wagenthal to have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. And both Sean and Louise, thank you so much for your testimony today. I've been a member of Parliament since 2015, had the opportunity to serve alongside John Broussard, who I know you know, Sean, as Shadow Deputy Minister at the time. It's been almost 10 years that I've sat on this committee. I think I'm even more a matron of the committee than Rachel is. Yes. I have to say, everything I'm hearing today, all of the concerns about being unaware of what was available to you, the sanctuary trauma that if you don't get it in the field, in theater, you get it when you come home, the challenges for families, every issue that you've mentioned today, I have heard over time over this last decade. And a lot of it is attributable to the work that you have done. But I can also say this committee has done report after report after report after report with recommendations that come from folks like you, and yet there doesn't seem to be any change. And of course, the reports from here go to the government gives their feedback. And then we wait. And when I was on committee first time, it took us till into 2017 to get everything government working again. But there had been a report that had been done on transition in 2014 before Stephen Harper's government was defeated that everyone agreed to. And the first thing that was decided that we would study here was transition. And I being a newbie, I just said, but that was just done and there were recommendations. Why aren't we looking at whether they're implementing them and how far it's gone or this type of thing? No, we need to study it again. So clearly the machine is broken. The machine is broken. And I just want to mention one more thing and then I'll pass it to you. I don't want to absorb all my own time. I get upset when people do that. But I want to mention that in October of 2017, Jean Broussard introduced Bill C-378, an act to amend the Department of Veterans Affairs Act, an attempt to entrench principles of respect, dignity, and fairness in an armed forces covenant. At that time, he said, we owe a duty of care to our veterans. Every veteran and their families must have timely access to the care and benefits that they need and deserve. So that has been in front of the House again, and it was defeated when the Liberal government voted against it at second reading. So my question is, can you explain to me further? I mean, this to me is the crux of the matter. And also the role of the Ombudsman, which you had a role in setting that all up. Are they independent enough from your perspective? That's a question I would like an answer to.
So I don't want to be partisan here, but as Louise was answering and I was answering about moving Veterans Affairs from Charlottetown, the member Sean Casey gave us a very reproving look, right? And I think it has to be called out because that sort of look is just the beginning of stigmatization that prevented us from getting care. It's the sort of look that says you have no right to step on my territory. There is no Gulf War syndrome, right? Ken Scott would say, Colonel Ken Scott would say, but he would set up a clinic that would refer patients that I was referred to. Then I was told, we don't believe in Gulf War syndrome, but we set up a clinic for Gulf War syndrome. And then when you get there, we'll tell you there's no Gulf War syndrome. So why do you think I didn't go to the clinic, right? Mm-hmm. It was so absurd. And I want to say that, I respect Sean Casey, and I've worked with him in the past, but he's got perverse incentives too, right? And what we really have to do in a nonpartisan basis is look at priorities. The priority is that everyone we ask, every Canadian we ask to put on that uniform, okay, exercises their right and choice to join the military, but once they're in the military, the powers of influence are so strong that we're willing to do stuff that sane people don't do. That's the definition of indoctrination, right? And so yes, you know what? The immediate affront by us suggesting we should move Charlottetown, there are compromises. We're all, you're all politicians here. There's a compromise. Move Charlottetown Veterans Affairs headquarters out with the decision makers out, put in equivalent job replacement from call centers that big cities or big centers don't need, right? But we also know in Charlottetown that there's a competition for skilled medical staff. Right? And so the skilled medical staff are being poached by the provincial agencies. And anyone that will tell you it's the worst guarded secret in the world that Veterans Affairs is struggling to staff because of this poaching that occurs. So moving Veterans Affairs out of Charlottetown, okay, would be a solution where the decision makers are there, and replace it with some other federal program that allows the same employment in the same area, and then Sean Casey doesn't have to give us that look anymore. But in terms of answering your question, where the big problem is, it's there. It's politics. It's money. But all sacrifices that occur, they're sitting at this table and that you guys have listened to for years, are occurring to preserve this system. It's now the sacrifice, the turn of government and Canadians, the sacrifice on behalf of veterans. We've upheld our end of the bargain. We have to have some sacrifices to, you know, in the military, it's so, you've heard this often again, which is when we join, we are ordered to do something, we can't say no. Why is it the public service can keep saying no to you? I don't understand that. I don't understand why more force isn't put. And I don't understand why Parliament would not unanimously endorse a duty to care or a duty to inform. It's beyond me, and I don't know why, under these circumstances, people would join the military with that lack of reciprocity.
Thank you. It's 6 minutes. Sorry. Sorry, it's 6 minutes. So now let's go to Charlotte. No, not Charlottetown, but Sean Casey. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I of course need to address your comments with respect to the people that I'm honored to represent, and I don't want to in any way, shape, or form appear or to be disrespectful of you or what you have said. So please, but it appears that you've already taken it as such, but please don't. I don't intend that. I am here in Ottawa as the voice of the people who elected me to speak for them, many of which, with respect, you have maligned here today. So I'll start with this. Do I understand you correctly that the only national headquarters of a federal government department that is located outside the national capital region should be moved back to Ottawa because people that are outside the national capital region have the wrong priorities, no sense of urgency, and they're lazy and insensitive?
I don't think you should refer to your constituents that way, because we certainly didn't. Okay, and the fact that you feel maligned means that you've lost priority about what it means to serve and what the sacrifices are being made on your behalf. And the fact that employees, in fact, we sat here and complimented when they're on one-on-one, they're great. They're overwhelmed with work. The files that Louise was talking about, okay, are overwhelming for them. The policies and procedures are overwhelming for them. And I would say that you represent the governing party that has every possibility of authorizing more resources to help further staff Veterans Affairs and to find a replacement for those jobs that could be lost. There's no maligning on this end, right? But we are maligning the system. And the system may consist of people, and if people want to take affront to that, that's their choice. But we need to address this problem. 25 years ago, we made the same requests that are being made at this committee, and nothing's happened. Why hasn't it happened? Because the system's still the same. Okay, we can't keep defending our little tribal areas. We have to look at the big picture and start making sacrifices on the part of the veterans, because we made them for you.
Ms. Richard? Anything to add?
No, not right yet.
Ms. Richard?
He's asking me.
Oh, sorry. I thought he said Mr. Chair.
Well, I said what I mean, and I mean what I said. I'm a veteran. I witnessed it. I've spoken to them. I met numerous times with Verna Bruce, Suzanne Tyning, ministers, deputy ministers. I've been at this a long time. It's very convenient that Charlottetown is, I'm not saying they have to come to Ottawa. They could be in Sudbury. They could be somewhere else, but not hidden away, tucked away in a little island so conveniently far away that it's too far for a veteran to know that they're being served properly. And the other thing also that I wanted to mention, sir, before the break was when I was there in 2006 about the Ombudsman's office being created under Pat Stogren. I stayed a day extra in Charlottetown to meet with our science department under Dr. Pedler. I was shocked because there is no science department. And not only there's no science department, but when we look at all this beautiful science that's happening around the world on Gulf War illness, presumptive illness, diagnosis illness, cancers, treatments, not just for Gulf War vets, but depleted uranium, Kosovo, Somalia, I mean, you name Afghanistan. It's not just Gulf War veterans we're speaking about here. It's modern combat veterans as a whole. And I was appalled that here we are being judged and denied and ridiculed and minimized and delayed and, you know, treatment delayed is treatment denied. And all they basically want us to do is go away and disappear. And I must say, the only one thing that's fast-tracked, sadly, in the system is cannabis. You can have as much as you want, basically, because it doesn't have to go through Charlottetown. So sometimes when I speak with certain veterans, they, you know, are we asked to be silent and be stoned in the basement of a place and just be a basement rat and be away, tucked away conveniently? No, we want a life. We want at least a bit of quality of life. We want to be part of a society. We want to be members of our families. We want what you all have. We sacrificed, we understand that. But why is the true war when one comes home against the government, the country that sent us there in the first place? Like, I don't get it. And to bring it back to you, sir, in Charlottetown, the other thing that I witnessed when I was there for that extra day with Dr. Pedler and seeing that we do not have a research department, and that must change, was when I was at a local pub, alone, minding my own little business. And what was being chit-chatted at the table beside me were different cases. So where's the confidentiality here? Like being a registered nurse, I mean, I understand the importance of my nursing notes, of the legal aspect of medical documentation. And when it's chatted about at the local pub, I'm sorry, sir, but that is crossing the line. So I just come back to, where's the accountability? I'm not disrespecting the people that work there. The problem is greater than the people that are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Casey. Et maintenant, pour une courte...
And now for Mr. Luc Desilets, who has 2.5 minutes. Thank you. And thank you again. We can tell that you have very deep feelings about all of this. And when we get into the examples like you have, we are able to better understand. And we have a lot of respect for both of you. I would ask the same question to both of you. A year ago, the government modified its practices. It's an external company that offers Services for Veterans Affairs Canada. I would like to know what you think. Has the situation improved, or is it quite the opposite?
It's a new service provider.
Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Desilets, for the question.
Louise indicates that she's not aware of that, and I think Louise's answer is the first problem, which was that stakeholders, meaning veterans themselves, were never consulted on this. Advisory groups were never consulted on this. Frontline employees were never consulted on this, right? So that's the first problem. The second problem is that I have a tough time validating my sacrifice and my worth to our nation when I'm being cared for by a for-profit company. It really strikes at the heart of what it means to be a veteran and to care for my nation, that when I get back, that I'm farmed out to a for-profit company. I can tell you personal experience-wise, I have insisted that I don't be put on that model with Veterans Affairs. So far, that's come to pass. But what about those that are? I can tell you that the people that are being put on that model are put through, as you've heard the suffering here of dealing with paperwork, the people being put through 8-hour interviews by this for-profit model, procedures they clearly can't handle. I have veterans calling me up in tears saying I had to walk out on the second day after 16 hours of questioning by a psychologist who didn't know me, I've never met. Now, this is inexcusable that this is being allowed to occur. We don't even know the price of this program in terms of the details. The contract has been kept confidential. How is that in any way a democratic value of transparency? I can tell you that my practitioners I see have been aggressively pursued to sell their clinics to this company, that they would be paid large monies as owners, but they were clearly informed that their employees would take a cut in pay. Why am I not given the best value practitioner that gets paid what they're worth, right? I don't understand it. So for me, this is it's anathema to my service, and it's really horrific that that's the way that government chooses to handle this problem.
Thank you,
Merci.
Mr. Desilets. And now let's go to Ms. Blaney for about 3 minutes.
That sounds good. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
Louise, I'm going to come to you and ask a question, a little heads up there. You spoke in your testimony earlier, and you talked about Gulf War illness being like a puzzle. Could you talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like for people who are having that experience in Canada?
Well, the puzzle starts with all the experimental drugs and vaccines that we were ordered to take without our knowledge or consent. Protocols weren't followed. Starting from here, Canada, with mass inoculations that were not documented in one's yellow book, vaccination book, to arriving on the battlefield and being ordered to take nerve agent pills, anthrax, botulism toxoid, the plague, that are, to me, it's to counterattack about nerve agents and biological warfare. And then all the environmental exposures that one is exposed to, regardless of where you are. Me as a nurse, dealing with, casualties, to contaminated uniforms, to where Sean was. He may have been far removed from where I was, but desert winds blow a lot of stuff around, so you don't have to be in immediate facility to be necessarily exposed or contaminated by something. And the vehicles and the ammunitions, depleted uranium. I mean, these are all, I like to, when I speak candidly about my warts, imagine a big giant sandbox. And instead of toys for the kids, it's tanks and soldiers, and you get the Scuds and the missiles and the tanks and the planes and the bombs and then the oil well fires. You're getting exposed to all of this. You don't have the luxury of taking a bubble bath at the end of your day. You go days and days and days without water, without showering. You're wearing these toxic, contaminated clothing on you with no hope of getting clean. And so you survive this, and Canada also, which was shocking, was one of the only countries that I witnessed. We packed up all our equipment and brought it home with us. The Americans, many just left all their stuff there. And what they did choose to bring back, they had decontamination teams take care of decontaminating, either it be a vehicle or a tent or whatever they felt was precious enough to bring home with them. But Canada, so when the receiving end is here, the poor guys that are working in logistics have never been over there, but they're receiving all these contaminated goods back. So they're getting secondary exposures. So the puzzle becomes huge. And with that, well, illnesses have happened. And some are defined and some are not so quite defined. And some are clear-cut and some aren't. And some are immediate. Some people got sick immediately. Other people may have delayed reactions. It's like, why can I not eat a shrimp because it might kill me or I may have an allergic reaction, but you can go to the seafood buffet and help yourself and you're fine? I mean, we're all different. Everybody is different. But with the military, it's one size fits all. And when I was inoculating people, and with anthrax, which I reacted terribly about, where I had to have shoulder surgery because it destroyed all my muscles, tissues, and everything in my shoulder. It was that bad. Why me and not Sean? But the thing is that it doesn't matter if I was injecting a 95-pound female or a 250-pound guy. It was the same dosage. Something's to go wrong. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand this. And, before we're sent anywhere in the world, and trust me and Sean, we're sent to the worst hellholes in the world. Someone has to do the dirty business of a nation, and we're the ones. And we do it. And all we want in return is, when we come home, if we need help, please help us. Don't question us. Don't make us justify our needs. Don't make us beg for crumbs and then have to justify and appeal and all of this. Because before we're even sent anywhere, we have a full medical, a dental. We see a psychologist. We're checked from head to toe. You can't have a cavity. You're checked everywhere to make sure that you're not going to become a problem on that mission. So how dare our country, when we come home and we're in need, especially when you've sent us basically as lab rats, experimental everything. And then we come home and it might not be black and white, things might not be diagnosed. And then, yes, finally, thank God for the Americans and the British and Australians, where they do have medically unexplained illnesses, presumptive illnesses, because it's affected every single part of the body. Depending on what toxicity, it could have been from the injection, could have been from the pyridostigmine bromide, the nerve agent pill. It could have been from depleted uranium. It could have been from the burn pits. And the burn pits are everywhere. It doesn't matter what mission you're on. Like, we say one man, one kit. When you leave, you've got one duffel bag. That's your life. Well, when you're on mission somewhere, you've got to burn your garbage. You've got to take care of it. Well, that is toxic. Like, we burn from human, like operating room. Well, from amputated limbs to the latrines, to the food, to whatever is of waste is burnt. Well, that's toxic.
Yeah. Thank you. Lieutenant Richard. I know that you have a lot to say, but well, there is other MP who would like to ask more questions, and they are really so. Allow me to invite Mr. Dordell for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Dordell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our guests today for your testimonies. It's been certainly emotional and touching to hear from each of you, and a lot of the things that have been brought forward have consistently been brought forward when we did our transition for women in the military and just general transition. And I think to Kathy, my neighbor here's earlier comment that a lot of reports and not a whole lot of action on those reports, and I think there's even another one coming forward for service dogs as well. I guess I hear the frustration when you say, you know, where these outlets are that you get to go and have meetings at any of the headquarters, whatever, because I base boarding on mine, and a lot of them often wonder why they have to drive to Toronto, because most military, when they're done, can't afford a house in Toronto to live there. So it's certainly been raised many times for me in my riding. So, but we're really studying the Persian Gulf. I hope we can solve some of these problems, and we're trying to see exactly how that falls into place and why you know, you're not recognized as wartime service. So there really is one individual that can probably do that and recognize it more so than the committee. Have you had meetings with the minister to discuss, the Minister of Defense, to discuss these issues with them?
No. I've offered to Minister of Veterans Affairs to meet with them a number of times. We meet with her, and there's been no response. Minister of Defense, we gave up on that quest a long time ago because we're veterans. Their priority is to active missions, serving members. Veterans are really an afterthought for them. We are very low on the priority poll for them. They're already struggling with their limited resources. So, you know, you hear our frustration, you hear our anger. Right?
So I guess the follow-up question is, why has nothing been done this far in your mind? Why has there been no action? This certainly is a story now. The good news is we're discussing it. The good news is there's been some pickup from the media. I know Global picked it up as a story, as an example. Why do you think that it is not recognized?
Well, I personally think it's a twofold answer. If you acknowledge our war, recognize our war, well, then you need to acknowledge and recognize our illnesses. And not just the serving member, but our family, our partner, our spouse, our children. There are a lot of illnesses that have come home with us that are communicable. There's a lot of reproductive problems, such as burning semen with men, severe gynecological problems with women. I personally had to have a full hysterectomy at the age of 34. I was bleeding out of control to need transfusions. It was that serious. And even there, I was labeled a malingerer because I was cutting my veins so my blood work would look bad. So a lot of soldiers are afraid of what we bring home with us. And the equipment, our stuff. So to me...
But do you not think Veterans Affairs should want
But
to
is
know?
it
Would they
Veterans
not
Affairs
want to
that-
know that?
They do. 2013, the last time, this is the first committee I've done since 2013. In 2013, we had met over 14 ministers, 5 prime ministers. Like, how far do you go? And repeat and repeat and repeat and beg and explain. Like, we're not healthy to start with. You don't realize the toll this takes on us every time we have to do this. We go home broken. That you get discouraged after a while, and it's like, what's the point? And furthermore, why would I have to justify if I went to a war or not? The world recognized it. Kuwait recognized it. Why not Canada? What is wrong with Canada? And the Americans would like to know what's wrong with Canada. The British would like to know what's wrong with Canada. The Australians would like to know what's wrong with Canada. Because Canada's not contributing into international research. We are not carrying our weight. We are doing nothing.
So do you think most of the veterans that you speak to are of the same mindset that why it hasn't happened as of yet would be a consistent process, and just that's part of the frustration is that you shouldn't be having to fight for this still?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The disillusionment is widespread in the veteran community. I think, and then after a while they just give up. And they don't interest themselves anymore in veterans issues, which is sad because they could be real emissaries to educate the public about what's going on, right? It's, I think you ask, why is this happening? Number one is money. Number two is public awareness to justify spending that money. And you know what? Veterans shouldn't have to give up on their country because we certainly didn't give up on you guys when we were in uniform.
So did you have meetings with the Minister from Veterans Affairs as well to highlight some of these?
Yes, sir.
You know, that it should be wartime service.
Yes. Yeah, Minister Eggleton, Minister Duhamel.
Years ago, but I'm talking in the last...
Oh, recent. No, they don't want to talk to us.
So you're getting no help at all from the...
No.
Okay.
But is the decision to be made at that level?
Well, it would certainly help, I would think, if you're in that position, but also if you're the governing party in that position to...
Well, there's got to be
talk if
political
you're changing
will
for the
then.
topic of wartime service to the Minister.
Thank you,
National Defense.
Mr. Dordell. Thank you so much. And I'd like to go to Mr. Brian May for 5 minutes, please. Mr. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and as everybody has mentioned, thank you to the witnesses for being here and for your service and for your testimony here today. Seeing that we are coming to near the end of the meeting, it is sometimes one of the last questioners tries to summarize and maybe give you an opportunity to bring recommendations. And some of the notes that I've jotted down reminded me of some of the great work that is being done by some of the nonprofits and other organizations. And you mentioned, sir, that when you can connect directly with Veterans Affairs, that there is some great work being done, and that they do need more resources to deal with some of the complex issues. And I would agree that that's been my experience as well in working with veterans and different organizations. And one of them, if this committee will indulge me yet again, I've mentioned it here before, is the Military Veterans Wellness Program. That was started by the Toronto Police Services, specifically Constables Aaron Dale and Jeremy Burns. And they identified a very specific gap in being able to connect veterans with services. And one of the challenges I think Veterans Affairs Canada has is they don't have people on the ground directly in touch in frontline scenarios with veterans in need, specifically those that are suffering from homelessness or potentially drug addiction and mental health issues. And so there is that detachment and gap there. These two gentlemen identified this, created this program. It took off. I'm very proud that Waterloo Region really expanded the program. Two constables, David Cassidy and Brian Serapiglia, have actually, since they've taken on the program, connected over 80 veterans in the Waterloo region that were in need of services directly with Veterans Affairs Canada, and those folks are being served now. And so I'm wondering if there's other examples like that you can maybe bring forth as recommendations on how we here can facilitate, because I think there is a role to play from those frontline services. There is a role to play from nonprofit organizations and other organizations like the Legion, but also No Soldier Left Behind. You know, there's a role to play there, and I'm wondering, sir, if you can take the rest of my time to maybe provide us with some very concrete recommendations that we could put forth in this report.
Thank you, Mr. May. Yes, so it's always a fine line for veterans to recognize that, look, public needs to be involved, and at the same time, we don't want to see an abrogation of the government's responsibility to directly care for us. So, yes, I think, you know, the outreach program that civilians and police officers can do, anything is good that they can, because they become part of the solution, right? Where the education gets out there on the streets, they become more approachable. Until Veterans Affairs builds up a better reputation amongst the veteran community, we're going to need people like that to get veterans onto the programs, right? Until Veterans Affairs gets more resources, right? So there's a recommendation. Let's hire a lot more staff. Let's increase the budget substantially for employees. And I think also is that Veterans Affairs has to look at what Louise has been talking about. It's just one step after what Louise says, which is we really need, first of all, a true research department. Now Veterans Affairs does do some research. A lot of it's paper research. A lot of it's done in conjunction with Statistics Canada, and they produced the last survey, which is a very valuable tool. But the information is being ignored. Like, the focus has always been on, let's get those veterans employed and get them off the payroll. Let's get them out there and get them off case management because we got quotas to fill, right? And those are the perverse incentives that the employees are under. Instead, you know, we're not looking at the holistic part of the veteran, right? How do we make them feel like they belong to the country, right? How do we get communities to outreach? So another thing is, how do we care for the complex disabilities that many veterans are suffering? And the solution we've been recommending, and in fact I put it in the report to committee on April 14th, 2021. You guys all have a copy of it. And it's called Shattering the Stigma, but it has a multi-part recommendations to improve all aspects of Veterans Affairs. And that includes, for instance, a collaborative care model, which is an interdisciplinary team, a real one. Veterans Affairs says they have those. It's an administrative interdisciplinary team that they have, but a true team that are practitioners that know the client, know that if they're suffering X symptoms and that specialist can't deal with that, they have another specialist in line, right? And we have that, and that model's been working with the United States Veterans Affairs for a number of years now. It's very successful. So that brings us back to Louise's point. If Canada is not going to be doing the active scientific research, I think this was 10 years ago, but the U.S. Veterans Affairs Research Department, $270 million US annually is their budget. Okay, we're not even spending 1% of that, from my knowledge, in Canada. So then, if they're not going to do our own research, then let's complete the next part of the puzzle, the other recommendation. Let's accept all presumptive conditions that the U.S. has recognized for all special duty areas, right? That's an easy one. Let's incorporate their research, Australians in the U.S. Let's incorporate and accept their research and have informed disability assessment decisions based on that research. Let's have an independent team of specialists that tell Veterans Affairs, right, about this information, scientific information, and how to incorporate it in disability assessment. Let's change the way. Let's hire more assessors. You guys have been railing against the backlog for years. Let's hire more assessors. That's an easy one, another recommendation. But if you go back to the report that I provided, you'll see that there's, what have we got here? 53 recommendations in there. I think you'll find some very valuable ones that will address what we're talking about now. What I would want to say is that all the thank yous are so appreciated by us here. Right? And the words you have all said to us are very meaningful. I think the fear of every veteran is that it ends at thank you. There has to be some substantive compensation of some sort behind that, substantive obligation to care for us. And as I've said in private with some of you, is that some of the large focuses on just, get more money for this program that veterans have, and one reason is because it does replace a hole that's not been returned by our country. The reciprocity of we really care for you, we're going to show it to you. We're going to get you reestablished. We're going to have people there for you 24 hours a day when you're in crisis, right? And I don't mean a 1-800 number. I'm talking about a true practitioner, right? A clinical care manager that's there and on call for, a team of, let's say the case manager has 30 people, right? But she can also reach out to the specialist right away to help that person, right? And that's a true collaborative care model, and that's what we're missing in terms of the one-on-one care. The budget's the big thing we're missing overall.
Thank you to the witnesses, and I'd like to say on behalf of members of the committee, interpret, clerk, analysts, I'd like to thank you. À titre personnel, nous avions avec...
We had with us as an individual Sean Buria, retired captain, Air Force intelligence officer, and Lieutenant Navy Louise Richard, retired. Committee members, is it your will to adjourn the meeting?